The greatest mistake a person can make is believing that dignity belongs only to those wearing a badge. By the time Officer Ethan Brooks stepped into Courtroom 4B the next morning, every confident stride he had taken through the courthouse seemed to disappear beneath the polished marble floor. Just 24 hours earlier, he had been the loudest voice outside these very walls. Now he stood in complete silence, his hands neatly folded behind his back, waiting for a hearing he believed would be routine. The courtroom carried its usual morning rhythm. Lawyers quietly arranged thick case files across oak tables. The bailiff exchanged brief words with the clerk. Sunlight slipped through the tall windows, painting long golden lines across the American flag standing beside the judge's bench. Everything felt ordinary, yet something in the room carried an unusual weight, as though everyone except Ethan already knew the ending of a story he had only just begun. He glanced toward the gallery, expecting unfamiliar faces, but then his heartbeat slowed. Sitting quietly in the front row was an elderly black woman wearing a simple navy blue dress and a neatly folded pearl scarf around her shoulders. Her silver hair framed a calm face untouched by anger, untouched by fear. She wasn't speaking. She wasn't pointing at him. She simply watched the room with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that truth never needed to raise its voice. Ethan recognized her immediately. Gloria Jackson. Less than 24 hours earlier he had dismissed her with impatient words outside the courthouse entrance, assuming she was simply another elderly woman lingering where she did not belong. He never bothered asking why she was there. He never considered that every respectful person deserves to be heard before being judged. And now somehow here she was again. Imagine walking into work believing yesterday had already been forgotten, only to discover that yesterday had quietly been waiting for you. Ethan shifted his weight and forced himself to look away, convincing himself it was only coincidence. After all, courtrooms welcomed countless visitors every day. Witnesses, families, attorneys, reporters. She could be anyone. She could be waiting for any case. Yet the uneasy feeling settling in his chest refused to disappear. Around him, conversations softened whenever Gloria looked up. A young attorney greeted her with genuine respect. An older court employee smiled warmly before placing a folder beside her seat. Even the bailiff offered a polite nod that she returned with quiet grace. None of it made sense to Ethan. He searched his memory for something he had missed, replaying yesterday's encounter piece by piece. The gray sidewalk, the courthouse steps, the cool autumn breeze, her calm voice, his hurried assumptions. One sentence she had spoken lingered in his mind more clearly than anything else. Sometimes tomorrow arrives much faster than people expect. At the time he dismissed it as nothing more than an old woman's attempt to save face. Standing there now beneath the seal of justice, surrounded by polished wood, silent anticipation, and the steady ticking of the courtroom clock, those words no longer sounded ordinary. They sounded like a warning that had finally caught up with him. The quiet tension inside the courtroom slowly dissolved into the memory of the previous afternoon, when the city had been wrapped in cool October air and golden leaves drifted across the courthouse plaza. Gloria Jackson had arrived nearly 30 minutes early, carrying a worn leather folder against her side as she climbed the broad stone steps one careful step at a time. She had visited government buildings before, hospitals before that, and military ceremonies years earlier when her son returned home wearing a uniform that represented sacrifice rather than recognition. Patience had become part of who she was. Waiting never frightened her because she had spent much of her life waiting for letters, waiting for phone calls, waiting for her son to return safely from places she could only find on maps. The courthouse did not intimidate her. It was simply another place where truth deserved the opportunity to be heard. People passed without noticing her. Attorneys hurried through revolving doors while balancing coffee cups and thick binders. Reporters checked their phones. Families whispered to one another before entering security. Gloria stood quietly near a marble column, reading the notice inside her folder one final time. She was not there because she wanted attention. She had answered a lawful request to appear as a witness in a hearing connected to an official complaint. She believed institutions became stronger when ordinary citizens chose honesty over silence. Her late husband had believed the same thing, and their son Marcus Jackson had carried that lesson throughout his military service. Marcus had often told her that courage did not always wear a uniform. Sometimes courage simply meant showing up when it would have been easier to stay home. Gloria smiled softly as she remembered those words. Even now, after his years in the army had ended, Marcus still called every Sunday afternoon without fail. He never forgot birthdays, never missed holidays, and never ended a conversation without thanking his mother for teaching him that respect was something a person practiced every day instead of something demanded from others. Those lessons had shaped both of their lives. As the courthouse clock struck 2, Gloria adjusted the pearl scarf around her shoulders and started toward the entrance. Before she could reach the security checkpoint, Officer Ethan Brooks noticed her standing near the doors. He had already worked a long shift directing visitors and answering questions from impatient strangers. His attention settled on Gloria for only a brief moment before he made an assumption that required no evidence and asked no questions. He stepped into her path with the confidence of someone convinced he already understood the situation. Gloria stopped immediately, meeting his eyes with calm courtesy instead of frustration. She answered every question politely, speaking clearly and never raising her voice. Several people walking nearby slowed their pace, sensing the conversation had become uncomfortable, yet no one interrupted. The afternoon breeze carried the rustling of flags above the courthouse roof while traffic hummed several blocks away. Gloria tightened her grip on the leather folder, not because she was afraid, but because the documents inside represented responsibility. She knew exactly why she had come. She also knew that first impressions often revealed far more about the observer than the person being observed. Looking directly at Ethan with quiet dignity, she waited patiently, allowing him every opportunity to choose respect before tomorrow quietly arrived. Officer Ethan Brooks barely glanced at the folder in Gloria Jackson's hands before deciding it could not possibly contain anything important. His attention had already settled on the picture he had formed in his own mind, and that picture left no room for curiosity. "Ma'am, you cannot stand here blocking the entrance," he said in a firm voice, although she was standing several feet away from the main doors, leaving more than enough space for everyone entering the courthouse. Gloria answered with the same calm tone she had used since arriving. "I am here for a scheduled appearance, officer. I have my paperwork with me." She gently lifted the leather folder, offering it without hesitation. Ethan did not reach for it. Instead, he gave a quick glance toward the growing line of visitors and let out a quiet sigh that suggested he had already grown impatient. "People say that all the time," he replied. "If you have business inside, wait until someone calls you." Gloria looked toward the courthouse entrance where dozens of people continued walking through security without interruption. She could have argued. She could have insisted that her notice clearly instructed her to report early. Instead, she chose restraint. "I would appreciate it if you could simply look at the documents," she answered. Nearby conversations slowed. A young law student waiting for a rideshare lowered his phone. A middle-aged woman carrying legal files paused near the fountain. No one expected an argument, but everyone sensed the uncomfortable distance growing between confidence and fairness. Ethan folded his arms across his chest. "I have procedures to follow," he said. "Please step away from the entrance until someone verifies why you are here." His words remained professional on the surface, yet the dismissive tone beneath them landed much harder than the instruction itself. Gloria quietly nodded and stepped back without complaint. She understood that arguing rarely changed someone's heart in the middle of a public sidewalk. Respect, she believed, revealed itself most clearly when another person failed to offer it. She rested both hands on the folder and waited beneath the shade of a maple tree overlooking the courthouse steps. A cool breeze carried bright red leaves across the sidewalk, one drifting gently to her polished shoes before continuing toward the street. Several minutes passed. More attorneys arrived. Court employees greeted one another by name. Ethan welcomed each of them with practiced familiarity. Gloria noticed something else. Not once had he asked for her name. Not once had he opened the folder she had willingly offered. The silence around them became heavier than any raised voice could have been. Finally, Gloria lifted her eyes toward him and spoke with remarkable gentleness. "Officer, my father taught me many years ago that every person deserves to be seen before they are judged. My son learned the same lesson while serving this country." Ethan answered with a brief shrug, convinced the conversation was already over. "Everyone has a story, ma'am." Gloria offered a small, almost sympathetic smile. "That is true," she said. "The difference is that some people listen before tomorrow asks them to remember today's choices." Ethan dismissed the comment without another thought, unaware that several courthouse security cameras had quietly recorded every minute of their exchange while more than one courthouse employee had witnessed it unfold from only a few yards away. Gloria remained beneath the maple tree exactly where Officer Ethan Brooks had directed her to wait. She never checked the time, never complained, and never searched for someone with greater authority to intervene on her behalf. She simply observed the steady rhythm of the courthouse. Every few minutes another attorney climbed the granite steps carrying neatly organized case files. Court employees greeted one another by first name. Sheriff's deputies exchanged quiet conversations before disappearing through the security entrance. Life moved with familiar precision, yet beneath that ordinary routine something unnoticed was quietly taking shape. Across the plaza, a courthouse facilities supervisor paused after recognizing Gloria from a previous meeting and offered her a respectful wave. Gloria returned the greeting with a warm smile, but neither of them crossed the sidewalk to interrupt what appeared to be an official interaction with law enforcement. Near the entrance, a security camera mounted above the columns continued recording every movement across the front steps, exactly as it did every business day. Inside the building, another camera covered the security checkpoint from a different angle. None of those silent witnesses carried opinions. They simply preserved facts. Ethan remained unaware of how many ordinary details were becoming part of a much larger picture. His attention stayed focused on managing foot traffic, occasionally glancing toward Gloria as though expecting her to become impatient or argumentative. Instead, she continued displaying the same quiet composure. That calm unsettled him more than open frustration would have. He had grown accustomed to conflict ending quickly, either through compliance or confrontation. Gloria offered neither. She simply stood with dignity, allowing time itself to reveal character. A few minutes later, a young assistant district attorney named Daniel Ross exited the courthouse carrying several legal folders. The moment he noticed Gloria waiting outside, surprise crossed his face. He walked toward her with genuine concern. "Mrs. Jackson, I thought you were already inside preparing for tomorrow's hearing," he said politely. Gloria answered with her familiar kindness. "I was asked to wait out here for verification." Daniel looked briefly toward Ethan before turning back to Gloria. "Verification? Your appearance has been confirmed for weeks." Gloria merely smiled without adding another word. She never pointed toward Ethan. She never accused him of unfair treatment. She simply handed Daniel the same leather folder that had remained unopened the entire afternoon. Daniel glanced at the first page for only a second before nodding. "Everything is exactly as expected," he said. "Please come with me." Ethan watched the exchange from several yards away, suddenly realizing the folder he had declined to examine contained official court documents all along. Yet Daniel did not challenge him publicly. Neither did Gloria. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, and no attempt to embarrass anyone. The moment passed almost quietly, making it easy for Ethan to convince himself that nothing important had happened. As Gloria reached the courthouse doors, she paused for the briefest moment and looked back toward him. Her expression carried neither satisfaction nor resentment. It held only the quiet sadness of someone who understood how easily assumptions could become missed opportunities. "I hope tomorrow is a good day for everyone," she said gently before disappearing through the courthouse entrance. Ethan nodded almost automatically and returned to his duties, believing the incident had ended with nothing more than a minor misunderstanding. He did not know that tomorrow's schedule would place him inside Courtroom 4B, or that the woman he had dismissed with such certainty would soon become one of the most important voices in the room where every fact, every witness, and every choice would finally matter. The following morning arrived with clear skies and a crisp autumn breeze that swept through the courthouse plaza, carrying away the last traces of yesterday without erasing what had happened there. Inside Courtroom 4B, the atmosphere felt measured and formal, filled with the quiet confidence that only long-established routines could create. Attorneys reviewed notes one final time while the court reporter adjusted her equipment with practiced precision. The polished wooden benches reflected soft morning light pouring through tall windows, and the seal above the judge's bench stood as a silent reminder that every voice entering the room would be expected to answer to facts rather than assumptions. Officer Ethan Brooks walked through the side entrance wearing the same confidence that had followed him throughout his career. He believed he was there simply to provide routine testimony connected to the hearing listed on his assignment sheet. Nothing about the morning suggested that his own decisions from the previous afternoon would become impossible to ignore. He greeted another officer with a casual nod before taking his assigned seat near the witness area. His attention wandered around the courtroom until it stopped without warning. Gloria Jackson sat quietly in the front row, the same navy blue dress neatly pressed, the same pearl scarf folded carefully across her shoulders, and the same leather folder resting peacefully in her lap. She looked exactly as she had the day before, yet something about the room had changed completely. No one treated her as an unfamiliar visitor. Court personnel greeted her with genuine warmth. The courtroom clerk smiled as she approached to exchange a few respectful words. Assistant District Attorney Daniel Ross walked directly toward Gloria, shook her hand, and thanked her for arriving early. Several attorneys who had never spoken to Ethan acknowledged Gloria by name before returning to their seats. Ethan felt an unfamiliar knot tighten in his stomach. He replayed yesterday's conversation again, searching for something he had overlooked, but every memory only deepened his uncertainty. Then the courtroom doors opened once more, and a tall man in a dark charcoal suit entered with calm confidence. His posture reflected years of military discipline without needing to announce it. He paused beside Gloria, gently placing a reassuring hand over hers before taking the seat next to her. This was Marcus Jackson, her son, a decorated Army veteran whose quiet composure seemed to command respect without asking for it. He spoke softly to his mother, earning a warm smile that carried none of the bitterness Ethan expected. Instead, there was only encouragement. Marcus looked across the courtroom for a brief moment, his eyes meeting Ethan's before offering a simple nod that carried neither hostility nor accusation. It was the kind of greeting one professional might offer another, and somehow that simple courtesy unsettled Ethan even more than anger would have. As everyone settled into place, the bailiff announced the arrival of Judge Evelyn Carter. Every person in the courtroom rose together. The judge entered with measured dignity, took her seat behind the bench, and surveyed the room with calm authority. Before addressing the case, she glanced toward Gloria and offered a respectful smile. "Mrs. Jackson, thank you for being here this morning," she said. "The court appreciates your willingness to assist." Gloria answered with a gracious nod. Ethan's heartbeat slowed as the full weight of yesterday finally began settling into his thoughts. For the first time since putting on his uniform that morning, he realized he was no longer looking at someone he had dismissed outside the courthouse. He was looking at a woman whose presence already carried the confidence of truth before a single piece of evidence had been presented. Judge Evelyn Carter opened the hearing with the calm authority that came from years of placing facts above emotions. The courtroom settled into complete silence as the clerk called the case, and every participant took their assigned place. Ethan Brooks remained seated near the witness stand, telling himself that yesterday had been nothing more than an awkward misunderstanding that no one would mention again. He watched Assistant District Attorney Daniel Ross organize several folders across the counsel table with deliberate precision. One folder was noticeably thinner than the others, sealed with a simple evidence label instead of legal notes. Daniel rested his hand on it for only a moment before looking toward the bench. "Your Honor," he began, "before the testimony begins, the state respectfully requests permission to address a matter that became directly relevant to today's proceedings after yesterday's courthouse events." Ethan felt his shoulders stiffen. Judge Carter looked down at the filing before her, reading quietly for several seconds. "The request is granted," she answered. "Proceed." Daniel stood and turned toward the courtroom. "Mrs. Gloria Jackson reported to this courthouse yesterday under a valid witness summons issued several weeks ago. Her arrival, her interaction outside the entrance, and her eventual admission into the building were all documented through standard courthouse security systems." Ethan blinked. Security systems. The words echoed louder than they should have. Daniel continued without raising his voice. "The purpose of presenting this information is not to embarrass anyone. It is to establish an accurate timeline concerning a witness whose credibility and treatment are directly connected to issues before this court." Judge Carter nodded once. Accuracy serves everyone, she said calmly. Continue. Daniel lifted the sealed evidence folder and removed a single certification sheet. The recordings have been preserved according to courthouse policy. Multiple camera angles and official timestamps confirm the sequence of events. Across the room, Gloria remained perfectly composed. She did not look toward Ethan. She did not celebrate what was unfolding. Instead, she folded her hands over the leather folder that had accompanied her since the previous afternoon, her expression unchanged. Marcus Jackson quietly watched beside her, his posture steady and respectful. Ethan suddenly remembered every detail he had dismissed. The unopened folder, the patient requests, the simple offer to show official paperwork, the sentence about tomorrow arriving faster than expected. None of it had seemed important then. Now every memory returned with uncomfortable clarity. Daniel placed another document before the judge. In addition to the video evidence, several courthouse employees have voluntarily submitted written statements describing what they personally observed outside the entrance. Judge Carter reviewed the first page before looking toward Ethan. Her expression remained professional, free from accusation or disappointment. Officer Brooks, she said evenly, the court reminds every participant that honesty is expected from all witnesses, regardless of position or profession. Ethan swallowed quietly and answered, "Yes, Your Honor." It was the shortest response he had given all morning, yet it carried the greatest weight. Around the courtroom no one whispered. No one smiled. There was no satisfaction in exposing another person's mistake. There was only the unmistakable feeling that truth had entered the room, and once truth takes its seat inside a courtroom, every assumption must eventually stand beside the evidence. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the certified security recording appeared on the monitor facing the judge, the attorneys, and every person seated inside courtroom 4B. There was no dramatic soundtrack, no sensational moment waiting to unfold, only an ordinary afternoon preserved exactly as it had happened. The timestamp appeared in the upper corner. Gloria Jackson walked calmly toward the courthouse entrance carrying the familiar leather folder. She paused respectfully when Officer Ethan Brooks addressed her. The recording captured every movement with quiet precision. It showed her offering the folder. It showed her waiting patiently while speaking in a steady voice. It showed that she never interrupted, never argued, and never ignored his instructions. It also showed that the folder was never examined before she was directed away from the entrance. The video ended after Daniel Ross escorted Gloria into the building only moments later, confirming that her paperwork had been valid from the very beginning. Silence settled across the courtroom with greater force than any raised voice ever could. Judge Evelyn Carter looked toward the clerk. "Please enter the recording into the official record," she said. "So ordered," the clerk replied. Daniel then presented several written statements from courthouse employees who had independently described the same sequence of events. Their accounts matched one another with remarkable consistency. None of them accused Officer Brooks of misconduct beyond what they had personally observed. They simply described an interaction in which a cooperative witness had not been given the opportunity to present official documentation before assumptions guided the conversation. Daniel returned to counsel table before speaking once more. "Your Honor, this matter is important because the credibility of a witness should never be influenced by appearances or assumptions before facts are reviewed." Mrs. Jackson fulfilled every legal obligation placed before her. She arrived early, carried proper documentation, followed every instruction, and remained respectful throughout the encounter. Judge Carter nodded thoughtfully before turning her attention toward Gloria. "Mrs. Jackson, would you please approach the witness stand?" Gloria stood gracefully. Marcus Jackson quietly rose to help move her chair before taking his seat again. As she walked toward the witness stand, every step reflected calm confidence rather than triumph. After taking the oath, she answered each question with careful honesty. She described her arrival, her purpose for appearing at the courthouse, and the conversation outside. She never exaggerated. She never speculated about another person's intentions. When Daniel asked whether she had felt anger during the encounter, Gloria paused briefly before answering. "No," she said gently. "I felt disappointment. There is an important difference. Anger asks for punishment. Disappointment hopes for understanding." Those words lingered throughout the courtroom long after she finished speaking. Daniel offered one final question. Mrs. Jackson, why did you remain so calm yesterday? Gloria smiled softly before looking toward the judge instead of the audience. Because my son spent years serving this country to protect institutions like this one. If I lose faith in fairness because of one difficult moment, then I forget everything he believed was worth protecting. Marcus lowered his eyes for a moment, clearly moved by his mother's quiet conviction. Ethan listened without interrupting. For the first time since entering the courtroom, he realized that the greatest lesson unfolding before him had nothing to do with authority. It was about character, and character was proving far more difficult to challenge than any testimony ever could. When Gloria Jackson stepped away from the witness stand, the courtroom remained unusually quiet. There was no dramatic reaction, no whispered conversation spreading across the gallery, only the unmistakable feeling that everyone present had witnessed something far more powerful than a disagreement outside a courthouse. They had watched a person answer discourtesy with patience, assumptions with facts, and disappointment with grace. Judge Evelyn Carter carefully reviewed the exhibits one final time before folding her hands together. The record reflects that Mrs. Jackson complied with every instruction given to her, she said evenly. The record also reflects that her official documentation was available throughout the encounter and was never reviewed before decisions were made. Her words were measured rather than emotional, yet every sentence carried the weight of impartial judgment. She then looked toward Daniel Ross. Counsel, has the state completed its presentation regarding this matter? Yes, Your Honor, Daniel replied. The state simply asks that the court recognize the importance of treating every witness with equal dignity before any conclusions are reached. Judge Carter nodded before directing her attention toward Officer Ethan Brooks. Officer Brooks, this hearing is not about assigning personal shame. It is about reinforcing professional responsibility. Every person who approaches a courthouse deserves to be evaluated according to facts rather than assumptions. Public trust depends upon that principle. Ethan slowly rose from his seat. For several seconds he searched for words that refused to come easily. The confidence he had carried into the courtroom had quietly disappeared, replaced by the uncomfortable clarity that often follows honest reflection. He looked briefly toward Gloria before speaking. Your Honor, he began, after reviewing the evidence presented today, I understand that I failed to give Mrs. Jackson the opportunity she deserved. I should have examined her documents before reaching any conclusions. That responsibility was mine. No one interrupted him. The courtroom remained completely still. Ethan then turned toward Gloria. Mrs. Jackson, I cannot change yesterday, but I can acknowledge that I did not treat you with the fairness every citizen deserves. I am sorry. Gloria met his eyes with the same calm expression she had carried since the beginning of the hearing. She offered a gentle nod before answering. Thank you for saying that, officer. Accountability is where respect begins. Marcus Jackson quietly smiled beside his mother, not because someone had been embarrassed, but because honesty had finally entered the conversation. Judge Carter concluded the matter by directing that the certified recordings and supporting statements remain part of the official record. She also noted that the courthouse administration would review visitor procedures to ensure future witnesses experience consistent treatment, regardless of appearance or background. The decision focused on improvement rather than punishment, recognizing that institutions become stronger when they learn from their mistakes instead of hiding them. As people slowly gathered their papers and prepared to leave, Ethan remained standing for a moment longer, watching Gloria and Marcus speak with Daniel Ross near the front of the courtroom. They were not celebrating. They were simply discussing the next steps in the scheduled hearing that had brought them there in the first place. It was then that Ethan finally understood what Gloria had tried to teach him outside the courthouse. Respect was never something reserved for certain people after their importance had been proven. Real respect was offered before anyone's title, profession, service record, or personal history became known, because dignity was never supposed to depend upon discovery. By the time the courtroom emptied, the bright afternoon sunlight had returned to the courthouse windows, filling the polished hallways with a quiet warmth that had been missing the day before. People gathered their briefcases, exchanged polite goodbyes, and continued with the ordinary responsibilities of another workday. Yet for everyone who had witnessed the hearing, The morning no longer felt ordinary. A lesson had been recorded alongside the official transcripts, one that could never be measured by legal filings alone. Gloria Jackson stepped through the courthouse doors with Marcus walking beside her at an easy pace. Neither of them hurried toward the parking lot. They paused for a moment at the top of the granite steps, looking across the same plaza where yesterday's misunderstanding had quietly begun. The maple leaves still drifted across the sidewalk, carried by the same gentle breeze that had blown through the city less than 24 hours earlier. So much looked exactly the same, yet everything had changed. Marcus glanced at his mother with the admiration he had carried since childhood. "You could have been angry," he said softly. Gloria smiled without taking her eyes off the trees. "Anger teaches very little," she replied. "People remember kindness much longer when it arrives at the moment they least expect it." As they started toward the parking area, a familiar voice called from behind them. Ethan Brooks approached without his earlier confidence, walking with the quiet humility of someone who had spent the morning seeing himself through a clearer lens. He stopped several feet away, careful to respect the same personal space he had overlooked the day before. "Mrs. Jackson," he said sincerely, "I wanted to thank you for accepting my apology. You had every reason to make today much harder than it was." Gloria looked at him with the same calm expression that had never left her face. "Officer Brooks," she answered, "today was never about making your life difficult. It was about reminding all of us that every person standing in front of a courthouse carries a story we have not heard yet." Ethan lowered his head for a brief moment before nodding. "I will remember that." Marcus